I mean, this is a bigger topic, but I think this is the fundamental failure right now of healthcare. I mean, there's many things you can kind of complain about, staffing, et cetera. And some of it is not necessarily healthcare's fault. There's definitely, it kind of starts earlier that with like lack of scientific awareness. And when people don't have that knowledge, especially right now, they're going to fill it with something else. And so if somebody's telling you something that is totally false, but you don't have any background to know it's false, you'll just take it on, right? It's natural.
It sounds good.
But I mean, I think that this is like, there's a lot of like unwillingness to engage in the conspiracy theory people and all that sort of stuff, which I think was the wrong idea. I think that should have been engaging and gone beyond that. But the other thing too is it's the historical things with medicine. I mean, lots of things, but medicine's kind of a good example of it. Very hierarchical, right? Like I am the keeper of some sacred knowledge. Only I know the answer. I will disseminate it to the masses, sort of thing. And that kind of works. I mean, it works if you have the society built around that, then yeah, fine. You can make that work. But if you shake up the society, now people are very uncertain, that doesn't really work anymore. And so even if you don't have answers, this is very clear right now, even if you don't have any answers to any solutions or anything like that, you haven't even thought out those things. If you're listening to people and you're asking them why they think these things, that is already so far ahead of the previous structures that we've used for communications historically, whether you're talking about government or things like that. So another good example, whoever's prime minister, they like blame them for something, right? Very common. And now it's like a very common thing. A lot of, Trudeau did this sort of things, right? And it was like Obama did this. There's like many examples of this. But what people don't realize is like whatever they're complaining about, the federal government is not the tool to fix that problem. Right. But they're not really aware of that. And they have somebody else telling them that is the way it is, which is just not true. Right. And so a good example of like, let's say you're driving down Pandosi and there's potholes. Like you could blame Trudeau, right? But that's not going to be very productive use of your time. Mm-hmm. But if somebody's, somehow making that connection for you and listening to you and telling you other things you agree with, right? You have to have that nugget of truth. Then all of a sudden you have windmills cause cancer and I don't know, things like this, right? And you're like, totally. And people are okay with that. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like there was this great bit by Mark Maron a few years ago, shortly after Trump got elected. He's like, it's really interesting. You look at headlines right now and it's really hard to tell what's a joke and what's reality. Yeah. And so he's like, came up with a bunch of like, one-liners for like headlines and you just had to try to figure out, was it real or was it one-liner? Yeah. The only one that stuck out with me was like, Trump is now excited about hunting in zoos. It's like, oh, yeah. He's like, yeah, I can see that kind of making sense for some of his following. Yeah, sure. Why not? There's exotic animals or trophy animals there. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's valid. Oh, my goodness. You're going to have to like cut that bit and put it into the podcast because that was so good. Awesome. Okay, well, we should probably stay away from political. Let's just do that. I know. I try not to go there, but at the same time, I don't think what you're saying is too political. It's more just sort of like addressing some of the things that I think. Okay, so like, truth be told, one of the reasons that we are doing this podcast is to create opportunities to have conversations like this, because there has been that like hierarchical sort of like, we are the keeper of knowledge, and that has to go away. Yeah. And even physicians don't want that anymore.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think a lot of people are very comfortable in their
I know, but there's enough that chair. Are not, that are like willing to sit in that chair and be like, okay.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that would probably agree, but whether they're really willing to put that into practice or know how to put that into practice, I unfortunately, I think it's getting a lot better than, previous generations, but there's not only like before you go into medicine, but even in medicine, there's still a hierarchy. There's still an expectation. And I think some of that totally makes sense. Like you do want to feel very comfortable that whoever's taking care of you when you're very sick actually does have something, right? Yeah. Something that you can trust and rely upon. And so it does become very tricky when you want to be very obvious and just say, well, I don't know, which is the truth a lot of the time. Yeah. But I think that that's where the skills come in, because I think it's totally fine to say, I don't know, especially if it's the truth, but that's okay because I'm here with you and we're going to do this together and we're still going to do the absolute best we can for this. And because that's kind of life.
Absolutely.
Right. And so people get it, right? People get it. Like bad things happen for no good reason or sometimes pretty obvious reasons. But either way, like, the next steps, we'll take this together. We're in this together. And I think that speaks to a bit more just communication skills in general, like whether like a foundation, you want to do something, right? Well, asking people who have money for some money, sure, I'll get you something. But I mean, I think going beyond that and being like, no, there's actually like a bit of it's more of like a project, more of a story, more of a journey that I think you can bring some of those people along with you. And then that's my hope, is that you get more than just money. You get people with ideas and talent, and hopefully also with that, a better representation of the community.
Yeah. And I think you've articulated it brilliantly. That's exactly, and we've tested that. We know that works, and we're going to talk about that.
I think you guys do a great job with this.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons I think you're very successful.
Yeah,
I think we just keep on expanding this idea, but it does start to get into new territory, I think, for a foundation, especially this foundation.
It is. Yeah, it is for sure. And we are committed to being brave and maybe failing, here and there,
fine.
right?
Like, definitely ruffle feathers, but
we like it.
I don't know if is this a Canadian thing or is this like a West Coast thing? Because like Seattle, like I lived in Seattle for a long time, very passive aggressive.
Oh.
And BC is still not quite as much, but still same thing. Like
really?
When I'm on conferences, I'm just like, no.
Oh.
We've already answered this question 5 times. You guys are clearly not asking the question that you mean to ask.
Right.
I'm going to ask it for you, and so we can move on, because you're really frustrating me now. I don't want another meeting where we just keep on doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the flip side of that is that when we do new things in this area and it ruffles feathers, people get very scared to do it again. They don't want to do that again. Mm-hmm. When it's like, well, that's actually how you change things. Like, if you think everything's great the way it is, then fine.
Yeah. Don't
do that. Mm-hmm. But you don't know where the boundary is until you find it. And sometimes you're going to hit that thing hard and it's going to hurt. And but that doing that together will actually forge the relationships that will be more meaningful, rather than just doing whatever you're doing now in your isolated silos.
Totally. I totally agree. And this is why I'm so grateful for Allie's leadership, because she really is very passionate about.
Yeah, she's willing to not do things the way we used to do things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, are we ready? I'm hoping you recorded all of that. Today on the Wealthy Podcast, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Aleksander Tkach. Dr. Tkach is a neurologist at Kelowna General Hospital, and he is also the director of the Interior Health Stroke Network. Dr. Tkach is a wealth of knowledge on all things stroke, including how you can tell if you're having a stroke or someone you love is having a stroke. He also gets into how to prevent stroke. And we talk about a lot of the innovations that are happening in stroke care in the interior of British Columbia that Dr. Tkach is sharing with countries all over the world that have an interest in rural and remote care for stroke patients. Today, I'm super thrilled to be able to have Dr. Aleksander Tkach on the Wealthy Podcast. He has been a good friend of the foundation for many years. He is very well respected within his medical circles, for sure. We like to call him one of our cowboys.
Somewhat.
That doesn't wear a cowboy hat, but maybe one day. Just a little bit of background on Dr. Tkach. Dr. Tkach is a distinguished neurologist specializing in stroke care. He is currently serving as the medical director for the Interior Health Stroke Network and is a vascular neurologist at Kelowna General Hospital. Dr. Tkach has made a significant contribution to enhancing stroke care in the southern interior of BC. And you were instrumental in the success of our $8 million campaign a couple of years ago. to radically advance stroke care in the Southern Interior. So today we're going to talk about stroke and neurology and all sorts of interesting and fun things that people need to know about maintaining their brain, optimal brain health maybe, and what they can do and what they can expect if a stroke does happen.
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Tkach. Can I call you
intro.
Alex?
You can call me Alex.
Wonderful. Yeah. So welcome to the Wealthy Podcast. And before I actually get into all of my questions, I actually just want to say congratulations, because as I was wrapping up my prep last night for this particular podcast, I discovered an email that I received last week with regards to an award that you've currently just won. Mm-hmm. It is what is it called? The Provincial Executive Steering Committee's Impact Award for Improving Stroke Care in British Columbia. Congratulations. That's a very big distinction. And you've worked very, very hard to improve the experience for people and families who have experienced stroke. So congratulations on that. So, how are you this morning?
I'm very good, thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
Your bio is a little too flattering. Oh. I don't know, distinguished is probably a little stronger word. And, I'm part of a bigger team. Like Corey Bendall does most of the work. And, the radical change also really with Mike So coming here.
Yeah,
Dr. So,
yeah.
But it's everybody. Those are just some of the highlights. Pam Rusko is huge, especially in terms of influencing things outside of our region. Many people. Yeah.
I know it takes a team, but it also takes vision and leadership. Yeah. And I do believe that that's what you have brought to the stroke team since your arrival here at KGH. When did you get here?
I moved in 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
Okay.
Specifically to make a stroke network and start endovascular therapy here.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And where were you before that? You were in the States.
I was in Utah. Yeah. So I grew up in Montana. I left there. I did grad school there and undergrad and grad school. And then I went to medical school in Denver. Then I did residency in Seattle.
You kind of are a cowboy.
Yeah, no, I grew up with a cowboy hat for sure. And then I worked a bit in Phoenix and got really more interested in stroke and systems of care at that point. And then did my fellowship in Utah, mostly because they were very early adopters for telehealth. They started doing telestroke, I think 2005. Elaine Scalbran, probably one of the first in the nation, if not the world, to use telestroke.
And what is that? What is telestroke?
It's just using, two-way video conferencing so you can examine patients with an audio connection.
So they don't have to be like...
So, you got to remember, this is like pre-iPhone time. So this was even common LCD screen times. So to kind of put it into context.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was actually a bit more technological endeavor to do it back then, but still people did it. Mm-hmm. Audio visual capabilities, the internet was a thing, right? So it wasn't that hard of a stretch. Just nobody was applying it, and there was definitely some hesitation whether you could do it, and if you did it, was it safe? And very basic fundamental questions. And Elaine is just like a force of nature. She just thought it was a really good idea, and she thought everybody should do it. And the first place they did it was in Moab, Utah. And so this is just a good example. It's kind of been inspirational to me. So basically, she went down to the doctors there. Because Moab's a tiny town, but they got a huge number of visitors, tons of tourists. Oh. I don't know how many millions a year. It's huge. But the town itself is, I don't know, maybe they're up to 8,000 people. Back then, it was probably 3,000, maybe 5, something like that. So a very tiny town, long ways away from care sort of situation. Went down to the doctors and I think you guys should do this. They said, oh, we don't think so. So the next thing she did is she rented out or scheduled the high school auditorium and just did a huge public gathering and told the community about it. And then the community was all excited. So then the doctors had no choice.
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
Yeah, no, I learned from that story. So this is it's interesting. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but the closer you get to the contact experts, the harder it is to change minds or opinions or behaviors. But if it's, I mean, depending on what you're doing, that's the other option is you kind of go to other people that are also involved in it, that have opinions, that have input, and just go to them and get their input and grow and see if it still is. And by the time that all percolates to the surface, then either that person has no choice but to get involved, or they're okay with it, right? Because it came
grassroots,
it came organically up, and they've had input on it by then, and now they're comfortable. So it's not somebody coming in and telling them what to do. It's more of like, oh, everybody thinks this, and we're all doing it together, so it's a good idea. We'll just do it now.
Safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's one of the, I don't want to say it's a strategy, but that's the reason why it's so important to engage community in conversations around healthcare, right? Because a lot of the times, I think it could be easy to just make decisions or lean into sort of the intelligence or the experience of physician or administrations, but the community also has really, really valuable insight and power. Right. And so it's,
if you don't,
that example.
What's it for if it's not for the community?
I agree. I totally agree. But sometimes we get lost on that question.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really interesting thing. So there's this idea that if you do these things, it takes a lot of time. When in actuality, it saves time because then you're not going to make a lot of mistakes. You get them engaged. And once people are engaged, they'll do the work for you. Mm-hmm. And they'll do it in a meaningful way. That's going to be way better than you can do it. The people at the coalface or whatever term is the popular business lingo these days. But the people that are actually doing the work, those are the experts, and you're only as good as their expertise. Mm. So you can have CEOs and whatnot in your factory, but if the person who's putting the screw into the machine can't put the screw in the machine, you don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And if that person has a better way of doing it, you should probably listen to them.
Indeed.
And there's a lot of books about this. This is not a new idea. It's been a concept for a long time, but yet it just doesn't have any traction, I think, in most organizations. Mm-hmm. And I would also argue that the ones that have done this are famous, but they're the exceptions. Mm. So for instance, these concepts of like free time. Like paid free time. So that's where like 3M was probably one of the first companies to do this. And that's where the sticky note came from. It was out of one of those like free Fridays, essentially. I don't know if they call it free Fridays. That might be somebody else's term. The same idea, right? Just like you guys can get together. We'll pay you for your time. And if you come up with something great, but if you don't, that's fine too. Don't care. We just want you guys to like be able to collaborate and have fun. And we're going to give you like a half day or a day a week sort of thing to do that. And that's where like Gmail came from. That's where Google Earth came from. Like, so all these things that you think of as like, big innovation blips were from those sort of things. They weren't from, we need to solve a solution. Let's get all these minds together and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But I mean, that's like space race, which is like a lot of money and a lot of people to go fast, or the nuclear arms, that sort of stuff. Again, a lot of people, a lot of time to go fast, where if you break down each one of those, there's actually people coming with ideas that would have catapulted even further, but they weren't.
Never heard.
The organization couldn't integrate that information and move forward. And that's why it's fun when you're at like a smaller community level, especially a smaller community, because this is almost like an inherent process of a smaller community. So the joke I always kind of have is you go to a community and you kind of see how they're doing things, and however they're doing things is probably going to be the most efficient, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be doing it. Because to change things, it's a couple of people just saying that was bad, let's not do that again. So, from like a large organization, business speak, look at you like, oh, that's really innovative. They just call it Friday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's just what life is, right?
Yeah.
If your shovel breaks shoveling the walk, well, then you're not going to get that shovel again. Like it's I know it sounds maybe a little patronizing, but it's not when you think about how we've used that concept for the stroke network. So a good example of this, there's an ER physician in Trail, Nick Leinweiber. So Nick had just started being an Emerge doc. I don't know how many years he was into it, but fairly new to Trail. And the Emerge director at that time was like, Nick, you should help us out with a stroke. Like, go talk to Aleks and Corey and stuff. So we sat down with Nick and kind of figured out what does he think is wrong? Care. What do we think is wrong? What could do things better? And one of the big delays was getting a CAT scan. So everybody, if we're going to do something for a stroke in the acute setting, you need imaging. at this day. I mean, maybe someday we can get around this, but for right now, you need imaging, and mostly that's a CAT scanner. But Kootenays, there can be distances and all sort of stuff to get there, and these delays are big. So every minute goes by, you lose almost 2 million brain cells. They don't come back. Brain cells don't grow back. So it's a big deal.
Like when you have a stroke.
Yeah, when you have an ischemic stroke, the loss of blood flow to the brain, then this is a big deal. We want to intervene. It's probably the most time-sensitive thing we have in medicine. And so their CT techs, that's not that high a volume place. So they don't hang out in the hospital at nights and weekends. They're at home. And some of them take like 15, 20 minutes to get there. And that's a lot of brain cells. So Nick just said, hey, well, how about, if we get a heads up from the EMS crews that they're bringing in a stroke, we then call in the CT techs at the same time. So they just come in together. So we minimize our time down. Like, that's a brilliant idea, and good questions like, is that a good use of space, resources and all that sort of stuff. So we had to go through a little bit of testing and validation with that. But that concept then became like now part of like the official document for Interior Health, but then became like the working document for the province. And so now it's a concept that everybody just kind of takes for granted, but that basically was just Nick.
That's how it started.
Yeah, Nick just had a good idea. Seemed very obvious. I hadn't thought of it.
Well, and it's also like...
And I'd been dealing with this same problem in the U.S. Nobody else down there had thought of it.
Yeah.
So, but just some random person with a good idea, just...
It's also a rural regional problem. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a unique problem for those of us who live in rural, remote healthcare regions, right? Like, I don't know for sure, but I imagine that this isn't an issue in the Lower Mainland, right? So,
correct.
It's cool that the guy in Trail was like, listen, I've got this idea, and it was like, that is a great idea with application to other regional health authorities that have the same problem.
Yeah,
like, wow, our hospital's far away from where people might live.
So whether you're on
cool.
the island or Saskatchewan, whatever. I mean, this is a common problem, and so along with that, so about 30% of the world population lives pretty rural or remote. A lot of different definitions of what those terms mean, but that's about it. And Canada is actually close to 20%, about 18%. The thing is, though, those are our natural resources. So on one hand, if you were just looking at numbers, you might not get too excited about investing a lot in that area because it's a small percent.
Percentage-wise.
Exactly, percentage-wise. You're like, I'm going to invest in the cities where everybody's living, right? Makes sense. But it turns out that, these are foundational structures of how the country functions.
Right.
And the other thing, too, is that if you can sort some of these things out, they actually are very applicable and broadly speaking. So what I mean by that is the vast majority of trials and medicine development, all this sort of stuff, procedures, whatever, devices, happens in large academic urban centers. That's great. So if you're in Toronto, it'll probably work in Vancouver and Chicago. Fine, great. But there's a really good chance it doesn't work in Trail.
Or even Kelowna.
And so but the opposite is not true. So if you can do something really exceptional with resource limitations, then it's actually going to work also when you have more resources. So if you can do things like this, like in Trail or wherever, it's applicable on a much broader sense.
Right, yeah.
And so I think that that's another thing that's a really big opportunity when you look at it that way. So for instance, I pay attention to like what Vietnam is doing. Yeah. So it's the same idea with like low-income countries, like, lower resources. So whatever their stroke network looks like and is working, there's something I can learn from there.
For sure.
Scandinavia, basically outside of the coast, is the same situation. Northern Scotland is the same situation. So there's these groups across the globe where they publish things they pay attention to. A lot of Australia has this problem. And so, we now know these people because we all share these same problems. And, maybe the solutions can't be the same, but at least it's good to try and think about it from that point of view. So it is more of a global community, I think. I feel a bit. And the other thing, too, is that at least from the stroke research point of view, we're clearly recognizing that this is like a massive limitation in our data.
Yeah.
And now there's a big push to be doing research in these smaller sites.
And I want to come back around to that because you are doing some really groundbreaking, not to hyperbolize things, but groundbreaking work when it comes to stroke care for regional or rural remote communities. But I kind of want to just rewind a little bit. And first of all, we have a tradition on this podcast. We usually start with it, but you and I get so excited when we talk, we just go off. But I'm going to come back to it because I think part of the opportunity we have here is for people to understand you and why you're so passionate about your work in healthcare. So our opening tradition is around one of your like first moments experience when you realized like how important health is, or like, you know, our podcast is called Wealthy, and the idea behind that is that health is so much more nuanced than just sort of being disease free or not having an injury. It's mental health, it's emotional health, it's, you know, community health, it's organizing, all of these things. Can you recall kind of like the first moment when young Aleks kind of was touched by this awareness around health and healthcare?
But I mean, that concept is actually pretty sophisticated. So.
Okay. You can like cut this part out, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thanks.
I moved because I'm like.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to ask that?
No, just try and stay in front of your mic.
Okay. I'm like a naughty podcast host.
Yeah.
We're not cutting that.
Okay, that's a different podcast that we're talking about today. Okay. Sounds good.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm prepared for that podcast yet.
So I think that's actually a very sophisticated question. And I think it reflects a bit of growth in general. I mean, I think this is a concept that would be not applicable to me until very recently, just because it was just not part of the consciousness and health and wellness. These terms were just not.
And you were a healthy kid, and your family.
No, I mean, no, we had plenty shares of stuff of illness in the family for sure. But my mom's a nurse, my dad's a doctor, so it didn't really, you know, I don't know. I just kind of
took it for granted.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I guess. I don't have like a pivotal moment.
What drove you to pursue?
Sorry.
Fail. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I had some wonderful grant statement. I can make something up if you want. It'll be great.
No, it's totally great. But then maybe the question is like, what drove you to become interested in medicine? Maybe it's because you come from that family.
That's also not a very good story.
Or even like neurology.
Yeah, I mean, neurology is probably a better story. So, I mean, I've always been very interested in like how people think, why they think the things they do, and how you learn, and all that sort of stuff. Why you have emotions. So, both from just like a basic biological evolutionary sort of point of view, but also just a practical, you know, like, why is this making me mad? I think we all have these kind of even just like introspective questions about like, why is my brain doing this?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. As well as like cultural things too, like taboos and stuff like that. So I was always quite interested in that in terms of even like a sociology thing, but I was also always very driven in the sciences, and I excelled in that sort of stuff, in math and whatnot from an early age. So it was always, you enjoy what you're good at sort of situation.
Sure, yeah.
And I didn't really grow up with anybody in the household who would have promoted a sociology sort of liberal arts sort of journey, you could say. But, you know, I still studied quite a few different religions and things like that in undergrad, and tried to get into those sort of things in terms of literature and languages and things like that. But I think I fundamentally was just, what makes a human sort of question.
Yeah.
What makes a society a society? What's culture? What does that even mean? Why does it change? Why does it not change? These sort of things. And really, really the striking things of like, we do things that are so fundamentally flawed, knowing they're fundamentally flawed, but we still do them. Like it's a very common thing. We're talking about individual or groups historically. And so I think these questions are always quite interesting. We've got many examples throughout history, and recent history about this as well. Like I said, even personal. So I was always quite interested in that. Went to medicine thinking it would be, a good job, a really long-term challenge, get to do as much sort of scientific stuff as I would want, maybe do a research career, that sort of stuff. Didn't quite know if I wanted to commit to any of those things, but just thought it'd be a good place to go. And it is a bit of a commitment. It's a bit of a gamble because you spend all of your 20s spending a lot of money and spending a lot of time not doing anything else. And so it is a bit of a gamble. And I think a lot of people do feel a bit disillusioned at the end of it because you invest like your 20s.
Yeah.
And that's gone. And then you're now making money and it's with like a couple $100,000 of debt. And meanwhile, your peers have moved on and already have kids and families and careers and stuff. So it's a bit of a shock when you kind of go through that. And so then you have to choose your career. What are you going to do? You got to choose that in medical school.
You're like specialty.
So I like, and it's the same, I think it's still the same way at UBC right now, is I didn't do neurology till midway through my fourth year. And by then you already have had to schedule your interviews for residency. Most people have done most of their interviews by then. And you've kind of already selected your rank list of where you want to go for what you want to do. And I actually had chosen psychiatry, and largely because of these areas. And also there's a very influential psychiatrist in Colorado who just did some amazing like neurobiology work with schizophrenia. And so I was really enamored with that, like the neurobiology way of defining why people have like psychosis and things like that. I thought that was quite fascinating. And then I did my neurology rotation January of my last year, and I was too late to switch.
Oh.
It was too late to switch, so I started out in psych, and it was good. I learned a lot. It was very useful, but I knew I was going to switch.
Yeah.
So I had to rematch, which I would not recommend. It's very difficult to rematch for many reasons, but I was extremely lucky to get a position at the University of Washington. Really, really pretty good program, difficult program, and got through that. And it's a very, very high acuity critical care program, not a lot of community stuff. Most neurologists really like to sit around thinking about things. The high acuity thing isn't really what they want to do. They want to be in an office.
What is like a high acuity thing for?
Like strokes, critical care, trauma, brain trauma, bleeds, bad infections, things you're in the ICU for.
Yeah.
Rush to hospital.
Like what you do now.
Yeah. A bit. And so I came away from that program very comfortable with that stuff. And I actually really like that stuff. And so I did a bit of that when my wife in Phoenix, when my wife was doing her residency in pediatrics. But I had this kind of pivotal moment where I got down there and the director was like, hey, can you go be on this board for this American Heart and Stroke talk sort of thing. So I was on this panel and I was up there with some paramedics and there's a flight crew. And at that time in Arizona, there's only one flight company. Whereas for paramedic crews in Phoenix, there's 50 companies. And so we start talking about stroke, and the paramedics were universally very pessimistic, but the real pessimistic ones were the flight crew. Mm. And it's just based out of ignorance and their own experience. Sort of
and
situation.
these are the people that like air ambulance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so I started talking to them and kind of wanted to change their mind. And it was fairly easy to do because it was, 15 people and one organization. So it was actually very easy. And they're actually very, I don't know if you've ever worked too much with like EMS, the pre-hospital providers, they do it because they want to do it.
Oh yeah.
And they're always looking to be better. It's a really engaged group. They're really, really rewarding to work with. Fun. I just can't speak enough about it.
Yeah.
Love it. Just amazing. And so this is that group. And so we start talking about things and, we start talking about, well, maybe you would just fly to somebody's house if the story sounded like a stroke. And we started setting this up. We started thinking about triaging in the field and stuff like this. I'm making it sound like it was a long conversation. It wasn't. It actually took like a few meetings to get this done. Because, people already done field triage for stroke. It wasn't anything new. And And within about a month, what happened was they brought me somebody. They flew to this person's house because Arizona's a bit like a lot of places in the West where you have like a nucleus. It's big. I think the sprawl is 5 or 7 million or something like that. But just outside of that, it's very remote and rural. It's very mountainous and there's nothing there, right? Except for a few houses and there's actually people living there. So they flew to a house and they brought this person straight to us. And, so the story was this guy had an occlusion in the basilar artery. So you've got 4 main blood vessels that go to your brain. There's 2 in the front where you can feel your pulse. There's 2 in the back called the vertebral artery. Yeah, the carotid artery is in the front, the vertebral artery is in the back, and they go up your spine. And in the back, they come together to form the basilar artery. And that back and the bottom of the brain, called the brainstem, is all the most basic functioning of your brain. So breathing, eye movement, swallowing, and also all the information goes in and out through there. It becomes your spinal cord. Yeah. And
at the back of your head.
Like the base of the top of your neck.
Yeah. Okay. Base of the skull.
Base of the skull, right? That just above there. That's it. So it's very small, but very critical for most things. You don't think from there, but anyway, so if you have a stroke like he had, you get this thing called locked in syndrome, where basically you can kind of move your eyes up a little bit, maybe blink. You can hear. I don't really know why that's preserved actually, but you can hear, but that's it. You can't move anything, can't talk, maybe can't breathe, can't swallow.
Can you think?
Yeah, but you can think. Oh, you're aware.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why it's called locked in. So pretty horrible, right? And so they bring him down to us. He's totally locked in. We open up the clot and he does great. He does so well that he's really mad at me that I kept him for 24 hours in the hospital. He was like ready to go home within like 12 hours. So phenomenal. And of course, like the flight crew gets all excited. This guy could tell me what it was like to become locked in. He's like, yeah, when it started, I had trouble talking and walking. And then they loaded me on the stretcher. I wanted to go tell my wife like goodbye and I couldn't move my head anymore. And then I couldn't talk anymore. Then I realized I couldn't move my eyes anymore. I'm like, there's very few people that live to tell me this story, let alone like standing and pacing in the room wanting to go home within like 24 hours.
And so to clarify, the reason why he was able to articulate all of this to you is because you got there in time.
Yeah, because it's time and the endovascular therapy.
Yeah, okay.
So this is what one of the reasons we wanted to build this in Kelowna is because it has such a massive effect on these outcomes. And so this really got me thinking like this change. I'd already kind of been thinking about systems and how this affects greater than just any individual case sort of situation. And it really got me thinking like, oh, with the right, talking to the right people at the right time, the effect can be dramatic. And so with that one case, now, of course, the flight crews are super excited. And now they're flying way more often than they need to and probably overdoing it, right? But, it shifted from like the most pessimistic group to now the strong advocate.
Or because they're able to like actually save lives, which they're doing probably anyway. But like this is
But they'd given up on stroke. They'd be like, we will bring him to you. But they didn't rush, they didn't do anything fast because there's nothing you can do. These people are just going to do bad. That was their attitude.
Oh.
So they just kind of given up on it. And so now we shifted it from the other side of like, no, you're not going to do your like 30-minute pre-flight check. You're actually going to do the bare essentials and go. Yeah, and fly them straight to us.
So cool.
And so that really opened my eyes to this idea of like systems management. And then went to Utah, did a fellowship. I helped establish some of the newer telestroke sites, got to know kind of that rural lens a bit more. And that kind of, ever since then, I've been kind of following that sort of thing. But in the US, getting funding for research in this domain, non-existent. And getting hospitals to work together, not happening either. And so that was the shift coming to Canada. That it turns out you can get a lot done if you want to all work together.
Remarkable.
So here we are.
So I want to, I really want to get into some of the benefits and the applications that have come as a result of bringing EVT here and what donors have made possible. But I also would like, because we have you sitting in the seat, I think a lot of people are very curious about stroke. We know that, one of the, the biggest risk factors for stroke is age, which none of us can really do anything about, unfortunately. Not yet, anyway. Dr. Long told me I was supposed to ask you about AI as well. So later.
We don't have enough time for that. We can go on about many subjects, but
yes,
so
but
stroke.
For now, what is a stroke?
Yeah, so stroke, generally speaking, comes in kind of two flavors, hemorrhagic and ischemic. Ischemic is loss of blood flow, brain dies right away. Hemorrhagic is the blood vessel ruptures, which of course is going to have some amount of ischemic because now blood's not going where it needs to go, but blood itself damages the brain too. Bleeding in the brain damages the brain too. And so more common is the ischemic, it's like 80%.
And that's like a clot.
Yeah, it can be. So ischemic is I'm making large generalizations, not a nuance to this, but the number one cause is actually not a blood clot going to the brain. It's the small blood vessels in the brain wearing out over time. So even normal blood pressure damages the opening of these very small blood vessels. It's kind of a design flaw. And they kind of scar down and one day blood can't get through. That scarring also makes them weak and sometimes they rupture. So it's the same sort of thing. And so that's why age is thought to be a big driver of stroke. And so unfortunately, it's actually pretty high. Like age 75, it's like 20% population has a stroke over 75. It's really high. But blood pressure is also the major driver. So putting it in perspective, if your systolic blood pressure, that top number in the blood pressure machine is over 160 versus normal being like 120, you're 8 times more likely to have a stroke. And in reference to this, smoking is 2 times more likely to have a stroke.
Wow.
So, or diabetes is like 2.5 times more likely to have a stroke. High cholesterol, it's like 1.5 times. It's not actually that high. Very different than heart.
Yes.
Heart, it is more of those other things. And blood pressure plays a role, but it's much lower. So the brain is very special in this way. So that drives most strokes. And it's treatable. These are all treatable things for the most part. You can, not
these
age, but
risk
you can.
factors or comorbidities.
Yeah, exactly. The other one is blood clots coming from somewhere. Most of that's either hardening of the arteries, so atherosclerosis build up in the arteries, and then that is again it's fragile. As that builds up, the vessel gets more narrow. As the narrowing happens, the speed, the blood velocity picks up, and then kind of picks off this stuff and goes up into your head. The other would be strokes coming from the heart, most common there being atrial fibrillation or heart failure, mostly atrial fibrillation. And there's many other things, but those are the main things. And the vast majority of this is preventable. 80+% of strokes are preventable. So even though age is a risk factor, it turns out if you actually do these things and are very proactive, that if you have a stroke, it'll be much later in life. And that time of life where you have quality of life is extended.
Right.
So not just like being able to have a stroke or heart attack and be okay with it, but actually you delay those things and all those things. When we talk about good diet and exercise and all these sort of things.
So these are the ways that you can kind of like prevent the conditions.
Yeah. When we talk about like vascular health, you can't out-medicate a bad diet. You can't out-exercise a bad diet. You can't out-exercise or out-diet smoking. Right. So there's these things that, especially in the US, there's this tendency to use pills, but the pills really don't change outcomes very much if you don't take care of yourself. And so this is one of these things where we think you can go now into determinants of health, social determinants of health.
Yes.
Because if you don't have access to these things, then you're not going to do as well.
So like number one, like from a prevention, diet. Hey?
Diet.
Okay, like I know you're not a nutritionist, but like what?
Yeah, but my wife is a pediatric endocrinologist.
Okay, good. So then
we talk about these things a lot.
You can like arm's length advise, like what kind of diet adjustments are we talking about?
Big caveat is that the data on diet in general is not high quality data. Even like a really, really good study is not a high quality study.
Interesting.
That being said, and there's many reasons, they're difficult to do trials. That being said, the information we have on data and health, on diet and health is fairly consistent results for about 80 to 100 years. So it's not new concepts. Okay. So like a really fundamental paper, there's a couple of like fundamental things in terms of diet and exercise coming out of like Great Britain post World War II, where they looked at these high risk populations. They had these it was always men until like really the 2000s, having heart attacks by the age 50, and they looked at like what they're eating and where they lived, and they could really figure out that like they were all living in the same spot, relatively the same job. What was the difference? It was actually red meat. Like red meat was like once a week or daily. Daily was, of course, but the more you ate, the more likely you had a heart attack at a young age.
Interesting.
There's a reasonable argument to make is that the meat or the quality of the meat, because keep in mind, this is like industrial meat and it was post-World War II, was not good quality then, not great now either, unless you look for it, sort of thing. So there's some caveats to this. The other one that I like to point out, again, in the 50s, was there was one where it was the ticket taker versus the bus driver, because a lot of people, take the bus in London. So it was in London, and they looked at that too. And the bus driver again was having a heart attack in their 50s, and the ticket taker was not. And they never switched jobs. They was always doing one or the other. And it turns out that this is one of the
ticket taker? Like the guy that just like takes your ticket?
Standing every day. Standing all day long every day. The other one's sitting all day long every day.
Oh.
This is the first insight into...
wild.
Yeah, this is the first insight into being like sedentary is very, very, very bad.
Okay.
And so I bring these up because, not because they're like amazing trials, but like just to say we have like 80 years of data on this. This isn't like, we talk about like, not sitting, standing desks and all these sort of things, but we're very late to this game. It's been around for a long time. The same thing with like red meat, processed foods, fried foods, all these things. Like this data goes back many, many, many decades. It's been around for a very long time. A lot of it does have really good fundamental biochemistry data. But when you get to like population data, it can be a little more tricky to say, well, that's the thing sort of situation.
But like, I mean, if you're going to be, you have the opportunity to say to a broad audience, listen, if you want to have an impact or potentially reduce your risk for stroke or heart attack,
yeah,
what would you?
The answer is like the stuff you probably already know what you should be doing, and you don't need a doctor to tell you.
Like eat vegetables.
Eat your vegetables. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I can say like, yes, you should avoid red meat and processed foods and fried foods and all that sort of stuff. Yes, that's true.
Like, but alcohol.
Alcohol's not good for you.
Yeah.
No, there's no. It kind of might help some autoimmune diseases because it poisons your immune system.
Okay.
So it's a bit of an immunosuppressant.
Sound good.
But no, it kills your brain cells.
Yeah,
It's if you don't want dementia, then don't
so
drink
eat your
alcohol.
vegetables.
Yeah, sorry.
Forego the burger from A&W.
I mean, everything in moderation, right?
Sure.
So I think that rather than being restrictive, because that's not typically long-term successful either, is just we live really almost anywhere in BC. You live in an area where you can get really good produce locally. And so you just go get it.
Yeah.
And rather than just saying like, oh, I hate carrots. Okay, fine. Well, try something else.
Right.
I don't know. Like
Peppers.
just whatever. Like there's an abundance of things to try. Just try it. Just keep on trying it. Explore that. Maybe go so far as even visiting a farm. There's like pastoral farms like Oliver Armstrong and north of there, where it's like this cycle of life sort of situation. They don't have to use fertilizers other than what's produced by the cows and pigs and things like that, right? So, and chickens. And so there's really, yes, you do have to try a little harder, I guess, than just going to A&W, but the payoff is not just for stroke and heart attack, dementia, cancer, all these things benefit. It's not a pill. And just, it's part of life. Like, who doesn't enjoy food, right? If you don't enjoy food, you're probably depressed, and that's a different conversation.
Right.
Right? And so just find other foods to enjoy. Just make them vegetables. That's kind of my takeaway of it. I mean, yes, if you're eating ice cream for 3 meals out of the day, you should stop doing that.
Right.
That's actually going to be bad. But did you need a doctor to tell you that? No. Don't smoke. Do you really need a doctor to tell you that? No. I think the only one that I come across frequently that is a bit of a one that, again, has like 40, 50 years of data is eggs are not good. Egg yolks are the most concentrated form of cholesterol you can find, really. And
You're killing me right now. Like, I can give up the meat, but like, come on.
Again, every once in a while, it's probably fine, but it when you spike your cholesterol that high, it actually directly damages your blood vessels.
Okay.
And that actually, same with red meat, kind of does the same thing, but eggs even more so.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Well.
Yeah, so that's kind of the big thing.
All right, bring on the tofu and the chickpeas.
And exercise also doesn't have to be crazy at all. It's more just like not sitting around. Just like get out, do something you enjoy, go walk your dog more often, play with your kids. Like we're not talking about, you don't overthink it. Just do stuff you like to do. Just do it consistently. That's those are the two things. Have more vegetables, do it consistently, get up and do things more consistently. That's it. That's like, that alone will give you like a 30% reduction, which is way higher than I can get with any medication in stroke and heart attack and all those sort of things. And you're just going to be better overall health, extend your life in a meaningful way, not, avoid things like osteoporosis and osteoarthritis and things like that.
And even now, they're like, not to go down a rabbit hole, but they're showing the impact of, gut health and exercise on neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia.
Totally.
Yeah.
It is a bit unclear what with gut health, it's a bit of a chicken egg story still. We don't really know how much the gut health is a reflection of the diet and environment, and then that's associated with something good, or the gut health itself. It's probably both. It's just really a bit unclear, because it turns out that if you take some people's what we call good and then give it to the people who have bad, it doesn't always make them better sort of situation. But the diet does. And so again, if you're worried about Alzheimer's, it turns out the best data we have is exactly what I just said, to slow cognitive decline.
Amazing.
There's new technologies, there's new treatments, they're fine, but they're nothing compared to taking care of yourself.
Yeah. It's simple. Well, we didn't need a doctor to tell us, but we just had one tell us. Yeah. So thank you for that.
I think the other part of this is very true. Like, I can't do anything for you if you can't help yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this podcast, is because like it does give people the information and the tools so that they can help themselves. And while I do want to talk about stroke, and I want people to understand, and this is kind of where we'll go next, how to know if they're having a stroke, I also think it's really valuable to talk about how to not have a stroke.
Prevention is, of course, that's better than the cure.
Yeah, sure. Totally. Yep. Okay, so let's talk about that. Like you talked about the lockdown scenario. Locked in. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's not. If someone is, or someone let's talk about if you personally are experiencing a stroke. What's happening? Like what?
Yeah. So loss of blood flow to the brain.
But even like more so, like what are you feeling?
Most people will notice some fundamental dysfunction. So trouble talking, walking, maybe vision loss, that sort of stuff. Can't move part of the body, can't feel part of their body.
Is there like a headache?
Sometimes, but majority don't have a headache. Headache can be associated with it for sure, but not the majority. So fortunately, most headaches aren't a stroke. But if you had a headache and you can't move part of your body, then you definitely could be. Is
it just one side? I think I've heard that.
It often is one side. Okay. It can be both, but it's usually one side. So if all of a sudden you can't move part of your body, can't walk, can't talk, and by all of a sudden, like within seconds to minutes this happens, then that's 911.
Okay.
And so the acronym we use is FAST, face. So if you have a face droop, arm, if you have an arm drift, so you hold up your arms and one can't maintain its height, and speech, can't talk or be intelligible in your speech or understand language, and then T's for time. So that's the FAST campaign you'll see on the back of the ambulances. That's the public service campaign. It's been around for decades.
And time is that, every moment matters thing.
Yeah, exactly.
As soon as you start to notice
this
those
is exactly right. That's why the campaign was every moment matters. I mean, that's what we talked about in other interviews, right? Where we talked about every moment. And when the moments, it really, that's like a really good concept here, because this might be the last moment you get to hug somebody you love or talk to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talk about big concepts like walking on your own or, taking care of your own bathroom needs. Yeah, sure. Those are, but I mean, it turns out when you do focus groups with stroke survivors, people who've had strokes and families, those things are important. I'm not saying they're not, but a lot of people can adjust to those things and accommodate them. It's these other things that actually affect their quality of life, their fatigue, their depression. Those are the things where they say, this is my quality of life thing. And I mean, just imagine that, right? And for some people, it might be dancing. For some people, it might be golfing. And sure, those are really important for certain people too. But those are those moments that literally every second going by, you could never get back. And
so like every second
critical
of blood loss in the brain, like how many brain cells are dying that never come back?
About 1.9 million per minute.
Okay.
So what is that? Like 10 or 11,000 per second or something like that?
Yeah. So that's why time is that last piece in the FAST acronym. And so if you're with somebody and they're exhibiting sort of these symptoms, the advice is to call 911.
Yeah. Call 911. And even if you live in a rural area where you're used to driving your loved one into the hospital for emergencies, because that does happen, just limitations, still call 911.
Right.
Because we need the heads up at the hospital to get things ready so that things can go fast and there's not these delays.
I mean, there's so many things in there. And one of the reason I first met you was because we committed to doing a campaign for stroke initially the campaign was to bring a very special piece of technology to Kelowna General Hospital, endovascular thrombectomy EVT for short. But in working with you, you were very instrumental in wrapping other supports into that stroke campaign. You're very opportunistic. You're like, well, if we're going to do EVT, which we did have some provincial funding for, and I believe that our role in that was to help fund bringing it here and the suite and all of the rest of the things that we needed to be able to support EVT at KGH. But then there was also the stuff that you're talking about with rural remote and telehealth and some of the funds that were dedicated to like innovation projects, like the one you talked about with the transport, right? So I kind of want to talk about EVT because this is like some of the most life-changing technology I think that donors have enabled here at Kelowna General Hospital. So let's say someone you love is having a stroke, you call 911, and then what happens? They're whisked to KGH.
So generally in Kelowna, the response time is very short. Always caveats to these things depending where you live, but very short. And the crews here are very good. That's actually because of some of the trials, I think, because it's one of the trials we did with them. So and the foundation actually has helped a lot in this area too. But that's maybe even a whole other podcast about why research is super important for care. I'm not like lab coat research, but like pragmatic, patient-facing, makes a difference regardless of the outcome of the trial research. So our medics, because of that research in the past, because of trials, are extremely good, extremely good. The best I've ever worked with. I mean, maybe I don't think anybody from Seattle is going to be listening, so it's okay. Or Salt Lake, but it's okay.
But if you are, you guys are good too.
They're great. Well, there's this thing called Medic One in Seattle that's really considered like the top. But I would say that these folks are better. Anyway, so, well, for stroke, let's just, stick to my neck of the woods. So anyway, you come in, we get an alert that's going to happen. We kind of know who's coming in and stuff like that. The team usually meets them at the door, team being myself, usually a stroke nurse and the emerge physician. And we kind of assess, get a CAT scan really quick. All that during that time, we're kind of doing an exam, figuring out what treatments would be appropriate. Because some treatments have risks and, versus benefits, so just trying to sort those things out. What happened, when it happened, all that sort of stuff. And then decide on treatment and whether that's going to be a lytic agent, it's a medication trying to break up clots to restore
clot
blood.
Buster.
Yeah. Or endovascular therapy. Endovascular therapy is only for big strokes. It's not the majority of strokes. It's probably maybe 15-20% of people that have a stroke are eligible for endovascular therapy. Right now, it's a bit lower than that, but probably should be more in that 15 to 20% range. Where lytic is much more. That's probably more like 30-40% of people can get lytic.
The clot buster.
Yeah, the clot buster. Mm-hmm. And so if we need to do the endovascular therapy, there's a bit of sort of surgical preparation for that, but it's pretty minimally invasive.
And quick.
Yeah, it's very quick. So while the endovascular suite is getting ready, we get the patient ready at the same time. So we kind of always trying to work in parallel to save time, and then we bring them down and get started. And it's a puncture typically in the groin, sometime in the wrist, similar to like cardiac. And we use the arteries as sort of the railway or roadway to get up to the brain and extract the clot. A couple different ways that happens and restore blood flow to the brain.
You're like underplaying the coolness of this procedure, I feel like, because like you're literally pulling a clot out of somebody's brain guided, right? Mm-hmm. So this is all done guided.
It's dramatic. It's dramatic. I mean, the impact it has been pretty incredible. We, our first year, we saved the health authority, I think it was $1 million. Now we're closer to $2 million a year. Because we take people that would be in like long-term care homes and things like that, because unfortunately stroke often doesn't kill you, or if it does, you linger for a couple years, months to years, and then die. And that's quite a burden for family and the system and everybody. And so, I mean, maybe burden is too harsh of a word, but that is what it is.
There's consequences too.
Yeah. So not only do we avoid those sort of associated costs to the healthcare system and families and things like that, people having to quit their job to take care of their loved one, that sort of stuff, but we also just give people back life and opportunity and moments and such. So it is pretty impressive. I mean, we don't really have anything as influential in stroke as we do for.
So somebody can literally be admitted with all of those symptoms that you were talking about, that fellow with the locked in. I'll get it by the end of this conversation, right? Can be admitted with all of those symptoms and within a very short period of time have the procedure, and then the outcome
he was great. So actually, we had a really good case. It was in the first year.
Like here in Colombia.
Yeah, it was a woman in Kamloops who had just delivered twins like maybe a week or two prior to this. And that's what she had. She had a basilar occlusion. She was locked in. I think she was flown over from Kamloops, maybe driven, I can't remember, a couple of years ago now, and took it out. And
So she was, okay.
She went to rehab for maybe 2 days, and she went home and she was taking care of her babies.
So it's totally fine.
Well, I mean, she's a bit clumsy. I mean, she wasn't the same as she was prior to her stroke, but I mean, this is the kind of person that was never going to hold her kids or watch them grow up.
Wow. I feel like this might be just anecdotal. Maybe you have more to back this up. Maybe it's just your experience as well, working with stroke patients every single day. But I do feel like younger people are having strokes.
Yeah, the percent is going up in younger for a variety of reasons. Some of this is just these social determinants of health. It's probably mostly social determinants of health. So it turns out that, if you smoke and eat nothing but potato chips, you'll have a heart attack in your 30s and 40s. Like, there's nothing special about that.
Right.
You can get there if you try. Like, if you really don't take care of yourself, what you should be getting in your 80s, you'll get in your 30s and 40s.
Right.
And then drugs. Yeah. So it's particularly the stimulant drugs play a big role too.
Interesting.
As well.
Do otherwise healthy, so we've had some conversations and we'll be having more conversations around otherwise healthy, let's say for example, young men just having spontaneous heart attacks. Does this happen for stroke? Do otherwise healthy young people, and let's say young,
very rare. I mean,
30 to
the same with the healthy men thing too. That's also very rare to have a heart attack at a young age and be healthy. I mean,
if
I would question the term
congenital thing, right?
Right. Sure. But those are just not that common. They're just not that common. I mean, the stroke rate, if you're in your healthy 20s and 30s, the chance of you having a stroke is less than 1% a year. Okay. But heart attacks can be in the same category.
But then as you age, that continues to
increases, but increases much more rapidly later in life, like you said, 70s.
Right. Okay.
Unless, again, you don't take care of yourself.
Yes, of course. We're all going to eat our vegetables and go for a walk after dinner, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's
just do something.
Yes. I feel like that's good. That's good.
Whatever you want to do, just go do it. Doesn't have to be a walk. Play with your kids. I mean, again, things that you don't necessarily need a doctor to come up with ideas for.
Totally.
In fact, I would say the opposite. Doctors probably aren't the people to answer these questions for you. You should be answering these questions yourself.
I think, but
what do I like to eat that's healthy?
Yeah.
What do I like to do that's healthy? Just go and do those things.
I agree with you. But I do think that there is some, a reliance on the medical community to provide
back to the hierarchy
kind of information. Yeah, exactly.
I am some sacred keeper of knowledge that nobody else has. I tell you to eat vegetables.
Yeah. I love that though, because I love that you are, you're definitely a practicing physician, and you're saying here's some really practical solutions to help you mitigate your risk for getting stroke that have nothing to do with taking a pill.
And the same thing with supplements, all these things. No, you don't need any of those things. I mean, sure, medical things can happen, life can happen where you do need particular medication. So for instance, atrial fibrillation, one of the causes of stroke, more common later in life, you do need to take an anticoagulant to prevent strokes and that. So these direct oral anticoagulants. So you do need to do those things, even if you've never had a stroke. Right. And even if you have taken care of yourself. But if you haven't taken care of yourself, you probably don't have atrial fibrillation. So, I mean, there's congenital things that can get you there and whatnot. But the point being is that, yes, there's a role for medicine. But if you have atrial fibrillation, you take your anticoagulation, but you don't take care of yourself, you're still going to have a stroke. It just might not be from atrial fibrillation. You're still going to have a heart attack. You're still going to have kidney failure. You're still going to get neuropathy. You're still going to get lots of horrible bad things that'll make your life really miserable that were totally avoidable.
Wow. One of the things that we love about you, Aleks, is that you have this like insatiable kind of drive to innovate when it comes to stroke care in our region. You talked a little bit about telehealth. You talked about the transport stuff. What other things in stroke care are sort of on the horizon for you that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a whole other podcast, but fundamentally speaking, there's a couple of things. One is we long ago, I think really shortly after the iPhone became popular, we've really reached a point where the getting the information isn't like the information's out there. We all can access it some way. It's more of like how do you use it? How do you put it together? Mm-hmm. Healthcare, and this isn't a criticism in Interior Health or Canada, and doesn't matter what country. Healthcare is very behind on data and using data and getting data together. Some places worse than others. But the point is that with advancements in technology, there is so much opportunity that has already been leveraged in so many other ways that we can just do it. We don't have to invent anything. It's more of just like getting people to work together and removing barriers between kind of groups, essentially. And that's it. So that's fundamentally a big one I think that we should be focusing on. There's other stuff too. There are devices that I'd like to trial. There's a lot of research we'd like to do. And so we're part of a bigger movement in this regard too. I really want to get research into the smaller centers.
For the reasons you were talking about earlier, is that our problems our challenges are different. And the application is broad.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Again, it's almost like a whole other talk on why this is super important. I guess one way to think about researching these areas is, again, most research has never been conducted in these areas. So, aspirin and blood pressure control, they weren't used on the rural farmer in Saskatchewan. Mm. They weren't part of those trials. I mean, if they were a small percentage of it. So if you want to improve the health and well-being of people in those areas, which again is like a fundamental part of Canada, you can't lose these communities and have a functioning country. If you want to change things, we have to do it. Nobody's going to do this for us because otherwise the grants and everything are just going to go to the big institutions. It's going to be more of the same. Like somebody actually has to change it. That's actually us. So,
and by us, you mean the people that are living in the interior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that sounds like grandiose, but it's actually we're already doing it. Mm-hmm. So it might sound like crazy big idea, but it turns out that no, turns out you actually just drive to places like Trail and Nelson and just listen to them, and ask what they need. And it's actually not, like I said, it's not like lab coat sort of thing. It's really pragmatic. It's really at the level of the community and just engaging with them and learning from them and things like that.
And this is what they call...
Same with Indigenous.
Yes.
So there's the same thing, like another group that's not, they were experimented on against their will, but in generally left out of research, right? Yeah. And not to say that is, so basically there's a lot of learning there too to capitalize on, not necessarily from like a clinical research sort of thing. When I say the word research, I don't necessarily mean like a drug trial or anything like that. I mean, much more broadly speaking. Mm-hmm.
And we're going to invite Dr. Deanne Taylor to come and talk about, I think what you're referencing is this health systems learning, this research that's done.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's a fundamental piece of it. But I'm also like a loud, annoying voice for the Canadian Stroke Consortium. That's the main research organization for stroke research in Canada, and really turning that towards the primary stroke centers and try and get that kind of changed. And so I think people are on board, but.
Well, that's why you have lots of energy and you're
I'm
eating
overly
your
optimistic
veggies
as well. So.
And you're certainly a force to be reckoned with. You have elevated the Interior Health Stroke Network to become recognizable and award-winning. I know that you travel all over the world and talk about the work that we're doing here and the learnings and the application for stroke care for rural, regional, remote communities. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Like,
well, I mean, thanks
you're
for
rocking it.
I really just think the relationship with the foundation has been so pivotal. I mean, sure, there's a financial thing. Great. Wonderful. But I think we've grown together in how we approach these problems and how, in my mind, and Joanna's House for me was one of the kind of turning points in this regard. Like, what is the actual community needs being voiced from the foundation rather than the hospital needs to buy something, whether the community thinks they need it or not. Turning the conversation back around. And again, I hope the conversation goes from the foundation to say, okay, maybe you have other things that is not just money. And that's where Joanna's House, like that got built because there's actually people on the board that have skills building things, right? And so there is talent from very successful people on the board that I would also really like to capitalize on.
And in the community.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. But those people also know probably a lot of those other people in the community.
Absolutely.
Like, so again, it's a representation, I think, of the community. It's very meaningful.
It's like you said, when you invite community to participate in the solutions, to like back the people that are like you, that are really passionate and really knowledgeable and really want to drive change. When you invite them to be part of that conversation, it is, well, Ali likes to say it's magical. And that is really, I think, part of the recipe for success that we have been learning over the last several years. Joanna's House was a great example. Our stroke campaign.
Joanna's House changes so many lives every day.
Yep.
I mean, if probably a lot of people that are involved in foundations probably don't understand this, like the direct impact it has every day. It's pretty special.
Yeah. And I know a lot of families of stroke patients that have had to travel to Kelowna for care from places like Trail do stay at Joanna's House. And
it's one of my first questions when I meet them. Like, have you heard about Joanna's House?
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. But I just want to point out something. So like, it's magical when you make these changes in areas where it's not happened before. But the majority of people know actually what's good for themselves and their community. The majority. Of course, there's extremes on both sides and whatever, right? And political whims and all these things that can change. But from just a practical point of view, you don't need somebody in healthcare leadership to tell you what's probably good for you and your family and things like that. We can help augment that and we can add to it. And unfortunately with social media, there's a lot of disinformation out there that's bad. Sure. But again, you should be having a conversation that adds to what is already in place in most societies and most towns, rather than, again, coming in and saying, oh, this is going to be something new and we're going to do something, blah, blah, blah. Maybe. But I think that, again, I kind of get back to like what we call magical innovation. Like, don't use the same shovel. Nicusp says that's Tuesday. Like that's just how they live. Yeah. And they know what's good for their community. And yet we see missed opportunity by just not listening time and time and time again. And again, that's a broader statement, not just like, that's not a criticism for interior health, but just in general, when you look at like hierarchical businesses and stuff like that, which is how a lot of these things are run. But we're trying to get away from that, right?
Yeah. That's well, I think the point is to also is that there are people like you working at KGH, working in community, that have this optimism and this belief that, that there is innate knowledge and that just simply listening is the path forward. How awesome is that? That is. I mean, it's just engage. Just listen. Engage. Yeah. That's all you have to do. I mean, it's so crazy, right? Now, why was I never taught this stuff in all my like years and years of higher education? It turns out that just looking people in the eye, showing up, doing what you say you're going to do, asking them their thoughts, asking why they would want to do things. It's really, it is actually simple like that. It's not. Is somebody having a stroke? Do you? No. It's Corey. I thank you so much. I just have one last question. This is the Wealthy Podcast, and this is not only just about your work, but it is about you. In what areas of your life do you feel wealthy and abundant?
All of them. I feel really, I say it a lot and I still feel the same way. I really feel like we won the lottery moving here, coming from the US. And, I'll be very open about this, and it might seem not the socially correct thing to do, but like there's a lot of misconceptions on both sides of the border, but like my taxes are actually a little bit lower in Canada. My pay is a little bit higher. These are not like massive differences, but it's not worse. But school system's way better, environment way better. I live down by Rotary, so I bike every day. I bike by the beaches every day to get to work. I get to work with you and Corey and all these other people that are just amazing every day. I get to fundamentally change the way we approach stroke care here and broadly. I can go on and on and on about this. There's really nothing that, I don't find an abundance of for health and wealth in this area. I mean, even just the food, like I just said, like we were at wildlife farms last weekend with the kids. They had a tour, just like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how lucky we are.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, and thank you for putting all of that into perspective, Aleks. It's always interesting. I could talk to you for a lot longer than we have this morning. We'll probably have to have you back.
Sure.
It's an honor to work with people like you who are really driving healthcare forward in our community, for our community.
We're trying. But I think we have some really exciting things coming up, like with the research center, in a way that allows us to innovate way in completely different directions in ways that we just couldn't do before. So I think that this is going to be really exciting in the next few years.
I agree.
Really exciting. Like I don't think I can oversell it. I really think it's already become like influential far beyond Kelowna, and has potential to be like really big deal.
Yep, we're excited about it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aleks. Always appreciate you.
Thank you for your time.